Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So we all know that around this time of year, we really like to talk about Jesus' birth.
Amen.
We really like to emphasize that. And in a way, I'm going to be talking about that. Not really, but I will be kind of talking about his birth in his own right. But more importantly, I'm going to be talking about the significance of his birth and why he did it. Well, actually, I'm just going to cheat and just tell you it's out of love. He did it out of love. Everyone knows that. Jesus loves us. This we know. I mean, for the Bible, it tells us so. That was kind of lame. And it's true. I think that the Bible is probably just a gigantic declaration of God's love for us. It's a testimony of him saying, I love you. I love mankind. I did all this for you. And lately, I've been really encountering him, and I really feel that now in my life, in my spiritual walk with God, that I've been able to really experience and really just feel his love more so in my life, and I just want to talk about that for a little bit. And something I've been noticing with my generation, I don't know, are we X, Dr. Morrison, or are we in Generation Y? I don't know. For my generation,
you defy categorization.
I like how this is kind of like a conversation rather than me giving a giant message. I've been noticing something in my generation, how although there are exceptions to every single rule or exceptions to every single principle that's said, I've noticed that with my generation, we kind of have not a handicap per se, but a lot of people I know in my generation have kind of grown up as Christians. We kind of were raised in a Christian house, and a lot of people had really full homes. They had both parents intact, and they had a full family, and they're a very nuclear Christian family. And that's not bad. That's good. That's ideally what we would want. But it's something I've been noticing that because we grew up in this environment, then we didn't really have the chance to really mess up per se, or just get into just a lot of trouble, or just do wrong things. And so there's a verse in Luke, I'm just going to paraphrase it, where it says, those who have been forgiven much love much. And so I feel as though my generation, we haven't done much to be forgiven much, so we don't get the opportunity to really feel his love. Because I've encountered a lot of people who are pastors now, who are a generation behind me. They talk about their life before now. They came from a broken family, how both their parents committed suicide, and how they grew up on drugs, and they were just in gangs and killed people. And despite all this, they found God. And I always find that really just encouraging and inspiring, that despite all this, they do that. And I feel that my generation, although it's good that we didn't have to go through that, we didn't go through that. And so I feel as though I've been encountering people and they just don't really understand God's love as much as some other people. Although, of course, like I say, there's always exceptions to this rule. There's always instances where people really do. I'm not going to be arrogant and say I'm one of those people, but I'm starting to understand it a lot more. And so there's an instance where I was at this conference and I was listening to this man speaking. He gave this really just touching story about his life, and I was sitting there and I was just resisting the urge to cry the entire time. And I was just sitting there just holding my face. I'm like, I'm not going to cry in this gigantic group of people. I was so embarrassed, and my eyes were all tearing up when he was telling it, because it was just so heart-wrenching and serious. And so I remember he's a pastor, and he told us how parents have nicknames for their children, right? Usually you call them something like, hey sport, hey bud, hey princess. Well, they're really generic. But something like that, how parents usually give nicknames to their kids. And he was talking about how God has a nickname for all of us. Each one of us, he has a nickname for us because he's our Father. And so he had us do an exercise where we were supposed to ask God what his nickname was for us. And so after his testimony, I was already feeling kind of shaky, and I was like, I want to cry so bad from what you just said, and no one else looks like they want to cry, so I'm just not going to do anything. I'm not even going to ask you, God, what your nickname is for me, because I'm not there. I don't want to cry right now, so I'm just going to hold back. And so he led us in this prayer, And then everyone was just sitting there praying, just listening on God. And I heard like a lot of people laughing. They're just like, oh, this is so awesome. This is so amazing. I love you, God. And everyone was just having such a good time. I'm like, no, I'm not going to ask you, God. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And so I was sitting there, and then after a while, it was like, I was sitting there, I was like, this is going on for a really long time. Why is this going on for so long? And so I was sitting there, and I said to myself, okay, fine. God, what's your nickname for me? And I was sitting there, and I was feeling better, like I'd calmed down by then, and I was thinking, God, you already know me. You know me better than anyone else. I want something amazing. I want like a really awesome name, just like Heartbreaker, or just Charmer, or just Manly Man, or like T-Rex, or something. Just something overly manly, because God knows me. And so I'm like, you know what I would love to hear. I know you could tell me something that would really just boost my already inflated ego. And you could do that if you really wanted to. And so I was sitting there, and I was like, all right, God, now I'm getting excited. Okay, what are you going to tell me? Are you going to call me like stud or something, or just super handsome or something like that? And so I was sitting there, and then this name came to me, and it was Sweet Pea. And I was like, Sweet Pea? I was like, oh. I was like, God, you already know my desires. You already know my heart, and that name is just horrible. Oh, I'm not even going to hide that from you. I hate that name. Ugh. It was so effeminate, and I just felt so emasculated. I was like, why are you doing this to me? I was like, you already know how I was feeling. And I was almost having this like argument with God, although it's always futile to argue with God. And so I was sitting there, and I was kind of just like pouting, and like a little kid. I was like, oh, I'm Sweet Pea. I don't want to be Sweet Pea. And I was just sitting there all upset and just angry. And then I was sitting there, and then like in an instant, I just remembered something that it just came to me, and I was like, I know this name from somewhere. It sounds really familiar to me. And then it just like it hit me, and I got so moved by God's just His tenderness and His sweetness, because I realized that was a name that my mom used to call me when I was a teenager, and I had just completely forgotten it. It just fell out of my memory. And then the instant that I remembered that was something my mom used to call me, I could not hold back my floodgate of tears. And I just started crying and crying while I was sitting there, and I was trying to hide it. I was wiping my face as much as I could. And I was like, oh, this is too much. And in that instance, I felt so uncomfortable because I just wanted to leave, because I was like, that instance was so near and dear to my heart, and I just forgotten that part of my past. And it was just in that instance I really felt God saying, you see, Anthony, this is how much I know you, this is how much I care. I know things about you that you've forgotten. I know things that you didn't even say directly, something that was said about you, something that was said to you. And I remember really after experiencing that, after that moment, it kind of knocked down this emotional wall I had up that I didn't know I had up. And it really enabled me to really experience His love a lot more freely. And so after that, just whenever I go into like praise and worship or I'm reading my Bible, I can really just feel His love just kind of washing over me, and it's just been nice. And then after this experience that happened to me, I've been also noticing just people, usually my age, or of any age, this knows no exception, that people, and I think it happens to everyone in some manner, that in some part of their life they're kind of guarded, and they have an emotional wall up where they don't want to accept love, where they're really damaged or they're really hurt, and they don't really want to accept God's love there because they may not feel deserving, or they may not feel worthy of His love. And there's this one guy I encountered when I went on this trip with my Seasons InterVarsity. We went to Catalina Island. And this guy, we were in this small group of like 4 or 5 guys, and we're just talking. And this guy, he just felt that God was so angry with him. He's like, God is so filled with wrath towards me. He was like, did you ever read, I think it was like Hosea or some other random book in the Bible where God really demonstrated His wrath and just His anger and just all His just rage and just destroying just groups of people? And he's like, that's what God's like right now. Whenever I do something, God hates me. I can feel His anger towards me. I can feel His disappointment. And I was like looking at him, and I was just smiling. And I'm like, no, stupid. I didn't call him stupid. But I was like, no, that's not God. It says in Romans 8 verse 1. Fortunately, I had that memorized by then. I was like, in Romans 8 verse 1, it says that there's no condemnation in Jesus Christ. Never once does he condemn us. There's no way in heaven, I'm going to say that, there's no way in heaven that God would send a third of himself, a third of the Trinity down to become immortal. There's no way God would send God down to earth and become immortal to his creations just to be killed by his creations, for his creations. He would not do that if it was not out of a pure act of love. And I was really just emphasizing that to him. I said, no, God has nothing but love for us. He has no contempt for us. He holds no record of wrong. That's what Jesus did when he came down to die for us. He came and he wiped our slate completely clean. He never holds any record of wrong. And I was really trying to impress that into him, because I myself, we all do that. No matter how we may try. I still do that too. When we make a mistake, we're like, oh, I feel like I disappointed God. But we don't. And I've learned myself that I do this, and I think everyone does, that we have these kind of emotional walls up, because I believe that at all times, God is always giving 100% of his love towards us, kind of like a faucet that's always on, but we have an umbrella up, so to speak, and we're blocking out some of it, whether we just don't feel deserving of his love, or we just feel, emotionally ugly, or feel like we've done too much wrong in our life to accept or to be just worthy of his love. And so over time we have to learn to bypass those, and we have to learn that God knows all this already, and he accepts it, and he's forgiven us for it already. He's forgiven all the things we have done and everything we will do. And I was just really trying to stress this to him, while at the same time I myself was kind of realizing that too, and I still am. I think it's an ongoing process, learning how deep God's love is. I mean, we're going to be doing that for eternity, just learning how deep his love is for us and falling deeper and deeper in love with him. And then I also gave him Galatians 2:20, where I'm just going to take a little part of it, where it said, we also died with Christ, and in that Christ is in us, meaning that there is no record of wrong. God sees us as perfect when we're in heaven. He has erased all our sin. And so there is no reason for us to have all these emotional barriers. But in points in time in our life, we will encounter these emotional barriers that stop us, that inhibit us from receiving God's full, unadulterated, just unconditional love. And I feel like my generation never had the chance to, I think, what's on there right now? Yeah, Galatians, where it says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And usually people talk about when they're saved, they feel like their old self died. Who they used to be died. And I feel like I never had the opportunity to say, oh, my old self died. No, because I grew up with my dad, who was a pastor, or not a pastor at the time, but a very devout man who I looked up to, and so was my mom. She was a very loving woman of God. And so I never had the chance to just be like, oh, I'm casting off the shell of who I used to be. I'm no longer this imperfect being. I kind of was just like, oh, I've always been just kind of gray. I've never gone into the black area. I've been just okay my entire life. And so I've noticed that, I'm sorry, I'm taking most of your time now. I think I've gone past 15 minutes. And so I've noticed ever since I've really allowed myself, or at least a portion of myself, since it'll take a lifetime and then some to really experience all of God's love, to notice that I heard a message where they're talking about, you know how when you're in a relationship with someone, or if you just develop feelings for someone, you know how you just love being around them, you just love being near them, you just love being in their presence, and you're just like, oh, I just love being around you, I love smelling you. You go up to them, you go up to their head, and you're just like, oh, I just love smelling you, I just love being around you. But I've learned that I know in the church we always stress being in a relationship with God, but we don't really stress being in a relationship with God. I've noticed that it's become a very intellectual kind of relationship and not very emotional of a relationship. And I've learned that, and I heard this, and I really liked how this woman phrased it, how, you know, some people might not understand this, and so I'll say kind of a better version, but you know how every family has their own smell? Does everyone understand that? Like every family and every person has their own smell. Like my family has their own smell. The Morrisons have their own smell. The Spurgeons have their own smell. The O'Briens have their own smell. Every single person, every single family has their own scent to them. It's not bad. It's true. It's just us. It's humans. And something I've noticed in my life, and some people might not have noticed this, but usually if you spend a lot of time with someone else, usually your significant other, your own scent starts to smell like theirs, and they start smelling like you, and you kind of get like their essence on you, so to speak. And this woman was talking about how that's how it should be like with God. We should just enjoy being in His presence so much to the point where we just reek of God. I've encountered those people in my life where it's like you're walking and you're just like, oh, I can just smell God all over you, and they just are just so in love with God, and you're just like, oh, it's just splashing onto me, all this love that's coming off of you for God. And I've just been learning that everyone can have that. Everyone can have that just really in love with God feeling. Everyone can have that essence of just God just coming off of them. And probably the biggest thing in learning to accept God's love is just, and this is said a lot, but just letting it sink in, is that God's love is unconditional. It is not performance-based. We don't have to meet any expectations, because if we did, we never could. Because God is perfect, and we are so not perfect. That's why He had to die for us. But just really learning that no matter what we do, we will never be able to, one, match God's love. He will always love us more. We may be like, oh, I love you so much, God. And He'll be like, you don't even know how much I love you. And just learning to just accept kind of just this childlike mentality that the only thing we can really give God is our love, and the only thing God wants to give us is love in return. And so the golden verse of, I suppose, all Christians is John 3:16. And I think the most important word in that, if you could put that up, I think it's the third word. So. It doesn't say, for God loved the world. For God so loved the world. He was so in love with the world. He was so in love with His creation that He sent a third of Himself to come and be just like us, to be one with His creation and get tortured by His creation, for His creation. And it's just a really humbling thought that I've just been coming not to terms with, but I've been really accepting and really just letting sink into me. And so I hope that the thing you take away from this is that when you yourself are going into your daily life, since we all have some form of emotional barrier or emotional scarring that we've gone through, is to know that God has already seen that. He already knows our ugliest secrets. He has metaphorically and figuratively and eventually literally wash our feet, which in Jewish culture was like the dirtiest part of you. And so He already knows all that, and so why hide it from Him? Why inhibit your acceptance of His love by just thinking you're not worthy of it? Because we never will be, but He loves us anyway. And probably the best sign that He loves us anyway is in John 3:16, because He loved us so much that He sent His one and only Son to come die for us, so that just whoever not even walks next to Him but just believes in Him, they won't perish, but they'll have eternal life.